There are mornings when justice feels like a clean, bright thing, and there are mornings when it feels like I am carrying a stone in my chest before the first file is even opened. This was the morning I learned how dangerous a young man can become when money teaches him that other people are scenery. Come sit with me for this one. I do not tell this story lightly, and I would not tell it at all if I did not believe it says something rare about the world we are all still trying to live in. Stay close, because from the first minute that boy walked into my courtroom, I knew I was looking at a lesson that had been waiting years to be spoken out loud. It was Tuesday, 14th October 2025, and the rain had started before dawn in Lake Benton, Ohio. By 6:48 a.m., the limestone steps of Ashbury Municipal Court were slick and gray, and the flag out front kept snapping hard in the wind. I was at my desk by 7:12 a.m. with black coffee in my hand, just the way I have taken it every morning for longer than most lawyers in my courtroom had been alive. My father used to say that if you want to be fair by noon, you had better be humble before sunrise. I have been on that bench for 28 years. I arrive before everyone else because paper can lie, but a quiet room rarely does. The courtroom tells on people before they ever speak. The old radiator clicks along the east wall. The oak rail carries the smell of polish and wet coats, and the empty jury chairs seem to wait like patient witnesses, even in cases where no jury will ever sit. That morning, my clerk, Irene Malloy, set the first stack of files down and said, "Your Honor, Mr. Kessler is already here." Something in the way she said already made me look up. I remember wiping a small ring of coffee from the corner of my docket sheet. I remember Bailiff Calvin Brooks standing near the side door, hands folded, eyes forward, the way a good bailiff can hold a room steady without saying a word. And I remember the file number on top of the stack, case MC 254417, State of Ohio, Veers Rowan Pierce Kessler, age 19. At that hour, I knew the charge list. Reckless operation, leaving the scene, misdemeanor assault, criminal damaging, witness intimidation. What I did not know yet was that this file would follow me home for months. By 8:32 a.m., the gallery had filled more than a traffic case usually fills. 2 teachers from Jefferson Middle School sat in the second row in rain-dark cardigans. A man in work boots with a dialysis wristband waited by the wall. A local reporter from the Lake Benton Record had a notebook open on her lap. Nobody was talking above a murmur. Even before Irene called the case, the room had that pulled wire feeling, like everyone could sense a storm had walked in wearing a good haircut. When Rowan Kessler entered through the side door with his attorney, he did not look at the seal behind my bench or the officers or the victim or even the flag. He looked around the room the way some people inspect a hotel lobby they do not find impressive. He was 19 years old, tall and clean-faced, with expensive, careful stubble that told me he spent money trying to look like he did not care how he looked. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford jacket over a white crew-neck shirt, slim black trousers, white Balenciaga sneakers that had never seen honest rain, and a brown Hermes belt with the buckle turned just enough to be noticed. On his left wrist sat a Rolex Submariner. On the table beside him was a Louis Vuitton key pouch, and hanging from one finger was the kind of Porsche key fob people set down like a warning. His lawyer, Martin Hale, was older, seasoned, and already tired in the face. Mr. Hale had the expression of a man who knew the facts were bad, but was still hoping money might soften the edges. Rowan leaned back before we had even begun. He checked his phone once, though Calvin had told everyone devices were to be silenced. Then he gave a small grin toward the gallery when someone whispered his name. I later learned why people knew it. On TikTok, he was Arawankliv, and at the time, he had 312,000 followers. On Instagram, he had 84,000 more. If you have ever known someone who believes the room belongs to him before he has earned 1 inch of it, then you know exactly the look I saw on that boy's face. Tell me honestly, have you ever sat in front of a person who thought your whole life could be priced and paid for in a single afternoon? That feeling, that cold little scrape inside your ribs was already moving through the room. Then Elena Sofia Marquez came in. She was 52 years old, with rain on the shoulders of a Navy coat she had probably owned for years and taken good care of because replacing it would have meant not replacing something else. She taught 7th grade science at Jefferson Middle School and had done it for 27 years. Her dark hair was pinned back low at the neck, though the rain had pulled a few gray strands loose around her face. Her shoes were plain black flats, worn thin at the outer edges. She carried a folder that had been opened and closed so many times the corners had gone soft. When she sat down, she did it carefully, because 6 weeks earlier, Rowan Kessler's car had thrown her hip into the side of her own trunk hard enough to leave damage that still had not finished speaking. She was not alone. Her husband, Luis Marquez, sat behind her with both hands on the head of a cane. He was 57 and had lost most of his right leg below the knee in a machine press accident at Benton Tool and Die in March of 2023. 3 nights a week, he did home dialysis in the back bedroom of their small house on Alder Street. Elena's daughter, Rosa, worked overnight at St. Anne Laundry. And because of that, Elena picked up her 11-year-old grandson, Mateo, after school almost every day. Mateo had severe asthma. The night Rowan hit Elena, she had been on her way home with Mateo's refill inhaler in a pharmacy bag on the passenger seat. Her salary as a teacher kept the lights on, but only because she tutored 3 evenings a week for cash and graded papers at her kitchen table after midnight. She had driven the same blue 2011 Honda Civic for years. When it was totaled, the odometer read 186,403 miles. There is a kind of dignity I have seen in people who are carrying more than their share and still apologize for taking up space. Elena Marquez had that dignity all over her. The charge stemmed from what happened on Friday, 12th of September 2025 at 10:47 p.m. at the corner of Mason Street and Willow Avenue outside Greenleaf Pharmacy. Jefferson Middle had held its fall science fundraiser that evening. Elena had stayed until 9:55 p.m. cleaning up, stacking trifold boards, and loading 2 plastic storage bins into her trunk. Those bins held 18 beginner microscope kits and lab safety goggles bought with fundraiser money for students whose families could not afford supply fees. She had then driven to Greenleaf to pick up Mateo's albuterol inhaler, paid $68.91 at the counter, and stepped back into the rain to load the last bag into her car. At that same hour, Rowan Kessler had left a private birthday gathering at the Lantern Room, a rooftop club 3 blocks away. His 2024 Porsche 911 Turbo S, slate gray with black wheels, was caught on city traffic camera turning south onto Willow at 10:46 p.m., then accelerating into the pharmacy lot at 41 miles per hour in a posted 20 zone. Marisol Vega, the pharmacy technician on duty, said she heard the engine before she saw the headlights. Deshaun Fuller, who was driving the northbound Route 6 city bus, said the car entered like a bullet with expensive paint. Rowan's defense at arraignment on 19th of September had been simple. He said Elena stepped backward without looking. He said it was a low-speed bump. He said he left only because he was frightened by an aggressive stranger hitting his window. His father posted the $15,000 bond within 17 minutes of the bond hearing. A plea agreement had been offered 3 days later: admit reckless operation and leaving the scene, pay restitution, serve community service, accept a license suspension. Rowan refused it. Through counsel, he filed a motion to dismiss the assault and intimidation counts, arguing there was no probable cause. I denied the motion after reading the officer reports, but I left room for sworn testimony to decide the full weight of the matter. When Irene Malloy rose and called case MC 25-4417, State of Ohio versus Rowan Pierce Kessler, the whole room drew in one breath together. Rowan stood slowly, jacket open, chin tilted just a little like he was granting the court a favor. Elena stood too, smaller than him by nearly a head, but the difference in size did not matter much once I looked at their eyes. One pair was working hard not to tremble. The other pair had not yet learned that consequence is real. What happened next may decide how you feel about the whole thing, so I need you with me for the next turn. Stay right here, because the first witness did not just describe a crash. He described the first crack in a lie that had been polished for weeks. Officer Daniel Pike, badge 417, was the first witness. He had arrived at 10:54 p.m. after dispatch received a 911 call from Marisol Vega at 10:48 p.m. reporting a pedestrian strike. Pike was broad-shouldered, red from the cold, and very exact with his words. I have seen many officers fill silence with opinions. Pike did not. He gave times, distances, and observations the way a carpenter gives measurements. He said Elena was seated on the curb when he arrived, her left wrist swelling, her skirt wet with rain, one hand pressed to her right hip. Her blue Honda Civic sat angled in the mark spot with the trunk lid bent inward and silver-gray paint transfer across the rear quarter panel. Officer Pike testified that skid marks measuring 17 feet 4 inches began near the pharmacy awning and veered toward the outer edge of the lot. He found a crushed inhaler box beneath the Civic's rear tire and a broken pair of classroom goggles in a puddle 2 feet from the driver's side door. When he asked Elena what happened, she said, "He hit my car. Then he hit me with the trunk when it slammed. Then he tried to leave." Pike said she was calm, not blank, not confused, calm. That matters in a courtroom more than people think. Officer Tessa Nguyen, badge 233, found Rowan at 10:58 p.m. at Riverfront Fuel, 0.8 miles away. The Porsche had fresh scraping on the passenger front fender and a hanging fragment of blue paint. Nguyen testified that when she approached, Rowan was standing under the station canopy, dry under the lights, holding a paper cup and talking on speakerphone. She told him she was investigating a crash. He replied, "Then go investigate it. I barely touched anything." When she told him the victim was injured, he rolled his eyes and said, "Everybody says that when they see a Porsche." If you know someone who still believes decency matters when nobody rich is watching, then keep them in your thoughts while I tell this part. People like Elena Marquez live by quiet rules the world rarely rewards, and sometimes the only place those rules get defended is in a room like mine. I never forget who comes to court already tired before the case even starts. The state introduced body camera footage. I described it aloud as it played because I have learned over the years that people hear truth more clearly when it is spoken plainly. In the video, rain taps against Pike's uniform mic. Elena is sitting under the pharmacy awning, one hand on her wrist, breathing carefully. You can hear Marisol in the background saying, "What, she was by her own trunk. He came too fast." Then Pike walks toward the Civic, and the lens catches the bent trunk lid rocking in the wind. Mr. Hale cross-examined hard. He tried to suggest Elena's injuries came from stumbling after the impact rather than from the car's movement itself. He asked whether the lot lines were faded. He asked whether anyone had measured exactly how far Elena stood from the rear bumper. He asked whether rain could distort witness memory. Elena kept her hands folded. Rowan smirked once when Hale asked whether a teacher handling large bins and bags late at night might have simply lost balance. I watched that smirk. My father used to tell me that contempt often enters a room dressed as confidence. Then the state called Marisol Vega, age 34, pharmacy technician, mother of 2, witness with no reason to invent trouble. She wore scrubs under a cardigan and spoke like someone who hated being in public but hated a lie more. She said she had handed Elena the inhaler bag at 10:44 p.m. and watched through the window as Elena set it on the front passenger seat, then walked to the trunk for the bins. She heard the Porsche engine rise, looked up, and saw the car cut sharply right. It did not drift, she said. It turned. Marisol also gave the room its first true human detail, the kind no lawyer can stage. She said that after the impact, while Elena held her side, Rowan lowered the passenger window halfway and said, "This is why people like you shouldn't be out this late." Marisol repeated the sentence once, then lowered her eyes to the witness stand rail, as though she still could not quite believe she had heard it. Behind the defense table, Rowan whispered something to his attorney and shrugged. By the time Deshaun Fuller took the stand, the rain had stopped. Sun pushed through the high windows in thin white bars, and dust floated in them like the air itself had leaned forward to listen. Fuller was 46, a city bus driver with 21 years behind the wheel and the patience of a man who has seen every kind of foolishness from a driver's seat. He testified that he was northbound on Willow, stopping near Mason at 10:47 p.m. when he saw the Porsche turn in too fast. He said Elena was visible in the bus headlights, standing by her trunk in a pale raincoat. She wasn't in his lane, he told me. His lane was the whole empty lot, and he still came at her wrong. Then came the bus camera stills. Not perfect video. Rain blur at the edges. Headlights stretched thin across wet pavement. But in frame number 14, time-stamped 10:47, 12 p.m., Elena stands beside her own open trunk. In frame number 16, the Porsche's nose is angled directly toward the parking row. In frame number 19, the trunk lid is snapping inward. I have seen rooms change temperature on evidence alone. That one did. If you think you already know where this story is going, I want to test that confidence a little. Stay with me and see whether your first instinct survives the next layer, because by then this was no longer just about speed, rain, or a spoiled boy in a fast car. Something uglier was waiting underneath. The state next introduced the evidence log for Rowan's phone. Officer Nguyen had seized it after obtaining supervisory approval based on his active use at the fuel station and witness statements that he had been filming while driving. The phone, an iPhone 16 Pro Max in a black case embossed with the initials RK, was sealed at 11:21 p.m. in evidence bag E1187. The chain of custody was clean from patrol to property room. Mr. Hale objected to relevance. I overruled. The prosecutor, Dana Mercer, said they were not yet offering the contents, only the seizure process and foundation for later digital evidence. Rowan's jaw tightened for the first time. Then Elena Marquez took the stand. I have seen brave people break down, and I have seen broken people stand up so straight it hurts to watch. Elena was the second kind. She wore the same navy coat over a cream blouse, and when she raised her right hand to swear the oath, her left wrist still moved carefully. She did not dramatize anything. She never once raised her voice. That restraint gave every word more weight. She told me she had taught at Jefferson Middle since August of 1998. She taught science because, in her words, it gives children proof that the world has rules and wonder at the same time. She said she bought classroom extras herself when she had to because a child should not feel poor in a lab room. On the night of 12th of September, she had stayed after the fundraiser because one of her 7th graders, Ari Coleman, cried when a donated microscope was missing a lens, and Elena wanted to fix the kits before Monday so nobody would be embarrassed. After that, she drove to Greenleaf because Mateo's inhaler was almost empty and the refill had to be picked up before closing. When asked about impact, Elena pressed her lips together once before answering. The car hit the corner of my Honda, she said, and the trunk came at me. I hit the metal edge here. She touched her hip. I lost my balance and my wrist went under me. She paused. The courtroom was silent enough that I could hear the court reporter's keys. What stayed with me was not the pain. It was him looking at me as if I had interrupted something important. Dana Mercer asked Elena about her finances, and Elena clearly disliked answering. She said the Civic had no collision coverage because after Luis's accident, they could only afford basic liability. She said she tutored 3 nights a week, mostly algebra and science, for $30 an hour cash. She said missing 6 weeks of tutoring after the crash cost her $1,236. She said replacing the totaled car had meant borrowing from her sister and delaying a mortgage payment. Then she said something that caused half the room to look down at their hands. I kept thinking, she said softly, that I had no right to be upset because people live through worse. But my grandson asked why rich people get to be mean in better cars. You may think the hardest part of this story is what happened in the parking lot. It was not. The hardest part was what that one ugly act taught a child who had done nothing except wait for his inhaler and trust adults to behave like adults. If you have ever had to answer a child's question that should never have been born, you know why I still hear that line. We broke at 11:57 a.m. for lunch because I had learned long ago never to rush a case just because it is uncomfortable. Rowan left the courtroom laughing quietly with a young man in a cream sweater who had been sitting in the back row and texting the whole morning. Elena stayed seated, reading from a small folded note card. I later learned it was not a speech. It was a list of the school supply items still missing from the damaged bins. That is who she was. Even in the middle of being wronged, she was still worried about lab goggles. When we resumed at 1:14 p.m., Rowan came back with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up, as though the whole proceeding had become tiresome. He drummed his fingers on counsel table during foundation questions. He yawned once while Dana Mercer marked Exhibit 22, the damage estimate from Benton Collision for $6,480, and again during Exhibit 25, the emergency room bill totaling $318, not $42. Every now and then he glanced into the gallery, checking reactions as if the room were another screen. His attorney put on a cleaner version of the defense that afternoon, Rowan had been startled by rain glare. The lot entrance was poorly marked. Elena may have moved unexpectedly. Any harsh words after the impact, if spoken at all, were the product of panic. The alleged intimidation was just online criticism after local news identified him. Mr. Hale was careful. He did not call his client kind. He only asked me to call the incident confused. That is often what lawyers do when the facts are too solid to move. They ask the court to make fog out of glass. Then Dana Mercer called the tow yard manager to confirm damage angles and paint transfer. She called a medical records custodian to establish the wrist sprain, hip contusion, and 6 physical therapy sessions totaling another $1,194. She called Officer Pike back to describe Rowan's tone at the gas station more fully. Pike said that after being advised of the complaint, Rowan asked, "Can I just pay for the old car and skip the performance?" That line settled over the courtroom like dust. He had already decided the law was theater and the victim was an inconvenience. The first true turn came from Rowan's own mouth. Mr. Hale had not planned to put him on the stand that day, but entitlement makes poor clients impatient. He whispered sharply to his lawyer twice. Finally, after a short bench conference, Mr. Hale called Rowan to testify. It was one of those decisions attorneys make when they know it is risky, but fear silence will look worse. Rowan took the oath with the lazy ease of a boy signing for a package. Under direct examination, he admitted driving the Porsche. He admitted leaving the lot. He admitted saying something to Elena, but called it basically nothing. He said he was a content creator and entrepreneur, that people photographed him in public, that he had been targeted online before. When asked why he left before officers arrived, he said, "Because when you're recognized, situations escalate." He made himself sound hunted by fame rather than cornered by his own conduct. At one point, he actually said, "I am not saying she wanted a payday, but I understand how these things look." Dana Mercer stood up for cross-examination and did not hurry. She asked him how fast he was going. "Maybe 25, he said. She showed him the city camera calculation at 41. He said the camera must have caught him after braking. She asked whether he saw Elena before impact. He said no. She showed him the bus still with Elena in the headlights. He said the image was blurry. She asked whether he had ever told Officer Nguyen, "Everybody says that when they see a Porsche." He claimed he did not remember. He kept touching his Rolex as if time itself might rescue him. Then Dana asked whether he had used his phone while driving that night. Rowan leaned back and smiled a little. "No," he said. "I'm not stupid." Dana did not smile back. She simply marked the next exhibit for identification and said, "Very well." I knew from her tone that we had reached the edge of something. I have to tell you something personal here. After 28 years on the bench, there are still moments when I feel the room tilt before the evidence hits, and I know somebody has carried a lie one step too far. Have you ever watched a person build his own trap in real time and felt your heart sink because you knew truth was about to land hard? Exhibit 31 was a printed screenshot from Rowan's public Instagram story, obtained by warrant from Meta and certified that morning. Time-stamped 11:09 p.m. on 12 September 2025, posted from Rowan's account, A Rowan Clive. The image showed the reflection of his own face in the Porsche side mirror, city lights behind him, laughing mouth half open. In the lower corner, blurred but visible, was Elena sitting on the curb under the pharmacy awning with Officer Pike kneeling beside her. Across the image, in white text, Rowan had written, "Broke teacher tried to body check a 911 for a payout. Insurance exists, sweetheart." Nobody in that courtroom moved for a full second. Then you could hear the smallest sounds, a throat clearing in the back row, a pen dropping near the clerk's desk, the old vent above the west windows pushing out air with a tired hum. Rowan stopped leaning back. His lawyer shut his eyes just once, quickly, like a man stepping into cold water. Dana Mercer asked, "Did you post this at 11:09 p.m. after leaving the scene and before speaking to the victim again?" Rowan stared at the printout. "It was a joke," he said. Dana asked, "Is the woman on the curb in your post Elena Marquez?" He answered, "It's blurry." Dana moved closer. "Mr. Kessler, did you just tell this court under oath that you did not see her?" He shifted in the witness chair. "Not clearly." The gallery reaction that followed was not loud. It was worse. It was that low human murmur that tells you a room has lost patience and is trying hard to remain civilized. Calvin Brooks straightened by the rail. Irene Malloy stopped writing and looked up. Elena did not turn around. She sat perfectly still with both hands around a paper cup of water, as if stillness was the only safe place left. Dana Mercer then introduced a second post, this one from Rowan's private Snapchat story shared with 18 subscribers at 11:32 p.m. The prosecutor read it aloud because the image itself was ugly enough without embellishment. It showed Rowan back in the driver's seat at Riverfront Fuel, cup in hand, grinning toward the camera. The caption said, "Almost got hustled by a public school NPC tonight. Old people see headlights and think lottery." A few people in the gallery gasped. Rowan looked toward them, angry now, not ashamed. That should have been enough for any decent person to lower his head. Rowan Kessler was not yet decent enough. He said, before his lawyer could stop him, "This whole town lives to punish people who have more. That post was satire. If anyone here had money, they'd understand context." I asked him to answer only the question asked. He gave me a flat little stare and said, "With respect, Your Honor, this court treats success like a crime." You tell me if that line sounds familiar. It is one of the oldest lies power tells itself. Not that it harmed someone, not that it crossed a line. Only that people resent it for being powerful. If that kind of thinking chills you too, then you already know why what came next mattered so much. Dana Mercer was not finished. She asked Rowan whether he knew the young man in the cream sweater in the gallery, one Bryce Talley, age 20, seated behind the defense table all morning. Rowan said Bryce was a friend. Mercer asked whether Bryce had access to Rowan's phone after the crash. Rowan said no. Mercer asked whether Rowan had texted Bryce at 10:49 p.m. Hale objected for lack of foundation. Mercer replied that foundation had just arrived. Special Agent Serena Cole of the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation entered my courtroom at 2:06 p.m. carrying a gray hard case and a sealed evidence binder. The side door opened, the room turned, and in she came wearing a navy suit, wet overcoat over one arm, hairpin tight, expression all business. She had been delayed on Interstate 8 by an overturned truck, and Dana Mercer had asked for a short continuance after lunch, waiting on her certified extraction report. When Cole walked in, the case stopped being local in the way Rowan had hoped it would stay. Agent Cole had 22 years in digital forensics. She spoke in that plain, patient language good experts use when they know truth does not need decoration. She testified that pursuant to a signed search warrant executed on 18th of September, her unit extracted data from Rowan's iPhone and from a cloud backup tied to his account. The chain of custody remained intact from evidence bag E1187 through lab intake. She recovered deleted messages, temporary media files, location data, and app activity logs with exact timestamps. First, she confirmed the Instagram and Snapchat posts, then she went further. At 10:46:31 p.m., seconds before the Porsche entered the pharmacy lot, Bryce Talley sent Rowan a direct message reading, "Tap the trunk lady and dip, content gold." At 10:46:35 p.m., Rowan replied, "Watch this." At 10:47:14 p.m., exactly 2 seconds after impact, the phone microphone picked up laughter and a male voice believed to be Rowan saying, "I barely kissed her." Then at 10:49:02 p.m., Rowan texted Bryce, "Delete if cops ask." It is hard to describe a silence like that without failing it. The room did not simply go quiet. It closed in. Every person in that courtroom seemed to stop living inside themselves and start living inside the same terrible fact. The radiator stopped clicking. Even the reporter from the Record did not write for a moment. Elena finally lifted her eyes from the floor and looked at Rowan for the first time all day. Dana Mercer asked Agent Cole whether there was video. Cole said yes, a deleted draft recovered from the phone's temporary cache. We played it without audio first, 7 seconds long. The phone appeared mounted near the dashboard, rain across the windshield. Bryce's voice, once audio was enabled, saying, "There, trunk lady, right side." Then Rowan's voice, clear as a bell, laughing and saying, "Watch me make her jump." The steering wheel moved. The car angled right. The impact came half a second later. Mr. Hale looked like a man watching the floor open. Rowan's face lost color in a way makeup and money cannot fix. He gripped the witness chair arm so hard I could see the tendons in his hands. Agent Cole then testified that she found 5 older clips in a hidden archive folder labeled Night Reacts, each showing Rowan driving too close to pedestrians while recording their startled reactions for social media drafts. None appeared to involve contact, but all showed the same pattern. People were not people to him, they were content. That was the hidden truth. Not merely that Rowan hit a teacher and lied, it was that he had built a private habit out of making ordinary people afraid because fear filmed well. Elena Marquez was not just a victim of one reckless turn. She was the first person who had bled enough to expose what he had been practicing in shadows. I thought we had reached the bottom then. I was wrong. When Dana Mercer asked whether Rowan wished to change any part of his sworn testimony, he looked straight at me, not at the prosecutor, and said, "This is a joke. You're making a federal case out of a fender scrape because a sad public school teacher got lucky in front of a bus camera. My family could buy this block and turn your court into a valet stand." I have been insulted before. Any judge who lasts 28 years has. But there are moments when a courtroom itself seems to draw up to its full height. Calvin Brooks took one step forward. Irene Malloy's pencil stopped in midair. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Lord." I waited until the words were fully dead in the room. Then I said very quietly, "Mr. Kessler, you are now 1 sentence away from contempt of court. Choose the next one with more care than you chose the last." He did not answer. For once, silence had found him. "I want you to do something for me here. Stop whatever else is pulling at your mind and sit still with this moment. Listen the way a courtroom listens when a mask comes off and nobody can hand it back. Some kinds of truth deserve more than a quick glance. They deserve stillness." Dana Mercer rested after one final witness, and that witness widened the harm even further. Dr. Naomi Bell, superintendent of Lake Benton Public Schools, appeared by remote sworn testimony at 2:47 p.m. because she was out of district at a budget hearing. She confirmed that the 2 damaged bins in Elena's trunk held 18 microscope kits and 42 pairs of safety goggles purchased with fundraiser money collected from Jefferson families, much of it in $5 and $10 bills. She also confirmed that Elena had not asked the district for reimbursement. She had paid the upfront balance herself, $119.44.75, waiting on the fundraiser deposit to clear. Dr. Bell's voice shook only once when she said, "Ms. Marquez has never once in 27 years asked this district for special treatment." She then informed the court that after Rowan's Instagram story spread, students at Jefferson were sent screenshots by older siblings. On Monday morning, 3 7th graders asked if being a teacher made you poor enough for people to laugh when you got hit by a car. That is when the emotional feeling of the room changed all over again. This was no longer only about Elena's injuries or the damage to her Honda. It was about what a boy with money and a phone had taught a whole ring of children about human worth. The state then offered the victim impact statement. Elena unfolded the same note card she had been carrying all day, but what she read was not angry. It was careful in a way that almost hurt. She said her hip healed, her wrist mostly healed. The car could be replaced. What stayed was smaller and harder to name. Mateo now jumped when engines revved beside him in parking lots. Luis insisted on waiting up by the front window whenever she drove at night. And on the first Monday back at school after the crash, one student quietly asked whether she was still worth being a teacher after what that guy said. Elena looked toward me when she finished, not toward Rowan. "Your Honor," she said, "I do not need him ruined. I need him to understand that ordinary people are not props in the background of his life. There are sentences judges carry home. That one came home with me and stayed." Mr. Hale made his closing with the dignity available to a man who had almost nothing left to work with. He conceded reckless operation. He conceded leaving the scene. He even conceded the posts were cruel. But he asked the court to consider Rowan's age, lack of prior convictions, family support, and willingness to pay restitution. He called the conduct immature digital behavior layered on top of a traffic offense. He asked for probation, treatment, driving classes, and no jail. Dana Mercer's closing was shorter. She said this case was about choice, not youth. Rowan chose speed. He chose contempt. He chose to leave. He chose to lie under oath. He chose to mock the victim while she sat injured under a pharmacy awning. Then she looked toward the witness stand, now empty, and said, And when he thought money might still save him, he chose to insult the very idea that law applies equally in this room. It was one of the few times that day the gallery murmured in agreement. Then I told everyone to sit down. The room obeyed, but it did not relax. Outside, a siren passed somewhere on the avenue, and then it was gone. I asked for a 15-minute recess, not because I doubted the facts, but because I have never believed a judge should speak from heat when a human life is sitting under her words. I went into chambers, closed the door, and stood by the narrow window that looked over Mason Street. My father used to tell me that the law is strongest when it is calm. He also told me that if I ever forgot the weight of a sentence, I had no business giving one. When I came back out at 3:19 p.m., every seat was filled. The reporter had stopped pretending this was a routine afternoon matter. Irene Malloy had stacked the exhibits in clean rows, each paper square to the next. Bailiff Calvin Brooks stood near the rail with his hands clasped behind him, solid as a gatepost. Rowan Kessler sat forward now, jacket buttoned, face pale under courtroom lights. Elena Marquez held her note card in both hands, though she was no longer reading it. The room felt like the inside of a held breath. I looked first at Rowan because a person should hear judgment from the eyes before he hears it from the mouth. Then I read my findings slowly into the record. I found him guilty of reckless operation, guilty of leaving the scene of an injury accident, guilty of misdemeanor assault, guilty of criminal damaging, guilty of witness intimidation based on the public posts directed at Elena Marquez after the incident. I found that his conduct was not confused, not accidental in the ordinary sense, and not the harmless foolishness of youth. It was deliberate contempt wrapped in speed. I also found that he had given false sworn testimony in my courtroom. I said that plainly. A courtroom cannot function if oath-taking becomes decoration. As to the archive videos recovered from his phone, I said those materials raise separate concerns beyond the counts presently before me. I ordered certified copies of the extraction report, the recovered clips, and the transcript of Rowan's testimony forwarded that same day to the Benton County prosecutor for review of possible additional charges, including perjury and any offense supported by the archived driving conduct. Mr. Hale closed his eyes again. Rowan did not move at all. Then I said something my father would have approved of. I told Rowan that money can buy counsel, comfort, delay, and polish. It can buy a jacket that fits and a car that hums like silk. It cannot buy a private version of the truth. It cannot buy a discount on the harm done to people with smaller paychecks. And it cannot buy an exemption from the equal dignity of the woman you struck and mocked because you believed her life would never rise high enough to matter in a room like mine. I sentenced him first on the assault count to 180 days in the Benton County Jail. On witness intimidation, 90 days. On leaving the scene, 30 days. On reckless operation, 30 days. And on criminal damaging, 60 days. I ordered the 180, the 90, and the 30 for leaving the scene to run consecutively for a total of 300 days, with 180 days suspended on strict conditions. That left 120 days to serve. It was not vengeance, it was structure. Consequence has to be felt somewhere real or it turns back into theater. Then I set the terms of community control for 5 years after release. Full restitution in the exact amount of $14,730.63, covering Elena Marquez's medical bills, physical therapy, lost tutoring income, the destroyed inhaler, the school science equipment, towing, ride expenses, and the unreimbursed losses tied directly to the offense. His driver's license was suspended for 3 years with no privileges for the first 18 months. Before any reinstatement request, he would complete defensive driving instruction, trauma impact counseling, and a written reflection reviewed by probation that could not be posted, filmed, monetized, or shared online in any form. The part that mattered most to me came next. I ordered 600 hours of community service split with painful care, 300 hours at the Lake Benton Public Schools Supply Warehouse, unpacking, sorting, and preparing classroom materials for teachers who usually buy what children need from their own pockets, 200 hours with the city paratransit program, assisting mobility riders under supervision because he needed to learn how much daily effort ordinary movement takes for some people, 100 hours with the Greenleaf Community Asthma Outreach Program, stocking inhaler vouchers and clinic materials, because the item crushed under that Honda tire was medicine for a child who had done nothing wrong. If you still believe justice can be real only when it humiliates someone, stay with me a little longer and test that belief against this. Real justice is not a performance of cruelty. It is the disciplined refusal to let power keep calling itself innocence after the evidence is done speaking. I also barred him, as a condition of probation, from creating or sharing any driving-related content, prank content, or material involving unsuspecting members of the public. Any violation meant the suspended 180 days could be imposed in full. I ordered the immediate removal of the Instagram and Snapchat posts identified in court and prohibited any future public reference to Elena Marquez, her family, Jefferson Middle School, or the incident itself, except through counsel and legal process. Then I addressed the contempt issue. I told Rowan that when he said his family could buy the block and turn my court into a valet stand, he had not insulted me most deeply. He had insulted every person in that room who came there hoping the law still had one table where wealth and weariness sit at the same height. For that statement, I found him in contempt of court and imposed 10 days to run concurrent with the active jail sentence. I did not add time for spectacle. I added words for memory. Some lessons should be carried in a record where they cannot be edited. Rowan finally found his voice, and what came out first was not remorse. It was panic dressed as anger. He stood so fast his chair legs scraped the floor. "This is insane," he said. "I'm 19. You are throwing my life away over a teacher and some posts." Calvin Brooks took one measured step forward. Mr. Hale tugged at his sleeve, but Rowan jerked free. His face had gone blotchy red at the cheekbones, and the hand that had once tapped a Rolex now shook against the edge of counsel table. I let the room hold that ugliness for one full second. Then I said, "Sit down, Mr. Kessler." He stayed standing. I repeated it, quieter. "Sit down now, or you will leave in restraints." The room was so still I could hear rainwater dripping somewhere in the hall outside. He looked at me, and I watched the exact moment he understood I meant every syllable. He sat, not gracefully, not proudly, just heavily, as if gravity had suddenly become personal. His father was in the back row. That was the first time I had truly noticed him. Bradley Kessler, dark cashmere coat, polished shoes, silver at the temples, the face of a man used to ending problems by writing enough zeros. He did not shout. He did not rise. He just looked at his son with something I recognized at once. Not outrage, not embarrassment. It was the grief of a parent seeing the full bill for his own failures arrive all at once. Then I turned to Elena Marquez. She did not cry. People expect tears because they make a scene easier to understand. Elena only closed her eyes once and breathed out slowly through her nose. Luis Marquez lowered his head over the cane between his knees. In the row behind them, one of the teachers from Jefferson pressed a folded tissue to her mouth. The reporter finally began writing again, quick and sharp. Irene Malloy's hands, which had been moving all day without error, paused over the file like even she needed a second to catch up to what had just happened. I told Elena that restitution could return money but not peace, and that no sentence could erase what Mateo had learned that night. But I also told her this. The court had heard her clearly, and the record would now carry the truth farther than Rowan's posts ever did. She nodded once. That was all. Quiet people often receive justice more quietly than the world expects. That does not make it smaller. Sometimes it makes it truer. If something in Elena's restraint is reaching you, I want to ask you a real question. What is the hardest thing you have ever had to carry without becoming cruel in return? I would read that answer with respect because I've spent my life watching people decide in public what kind of pain they will let shape them. When the deputies came to take Rowan into custody, he looked around the room as if someone might still interrupt the ending. Nobody did. The Louis Vuitton key pouch stayed on the defense table. The Porsche keys were bagged with his property. His Tom Ford jacket lost its authority the moment his hands went behind his back. He did not cry then either. He just stared at the floor while Calvin read the transport instructions in a voice so steady it almost sounded kind. That is another truth people forget. Duty can sound kind and still mean exactly what it says. After the courtroom emptied, Elena remained near counsel table, gathering her papers into that softened folder. I stepped down from the bench, which I rarely do before the room is fully clear, and walked only as far as the rail. She looked up, startled, and straightened the way teachers do when someone with authority approaches, even after the day is over. I told her she was not required to say anything. She smiled the smallest smile I saw from her all day and said, "I know, Your Honor. I just did not want to leave without thanking the room." That line nearly undid me. I asked what she meant by thanking the room. She glanced at the empty witness stand, the clerk's desk, the rail, the chairs still warm from bodies. "Places remember," she said. "Children do too. I wanted to walk out knowing this place remembered correctly." I told her my father used to say the same thing in different words. Then I added, "Your students are fortunate. Even on your worst day, you taught." Elena lowered her eyes, touched the folder to her chest, and answered, "I hope he learned something too." Then she walked out into the cooling air with Luis beside her. 6 weeks passed. Court calendars moved on because they always do. Shoplifting, noise complaints, probation reviews, 2 bond hearings, 1 bitter fence line dispute between brothers who had not spoken in 9 years. But on Monday, 24 November 2025, Irene brought me an envelope with my chamber's mail. The return address said Jefferson Middle School, room 214. Inside was a letter from Elena Marquez written in blue ink on lined paper and a photograph clipped to the corner. The letter said Mateo had stopped flinching every time a car entered a lot too fast. It said Luis still waited at the window when she drove home late, but now he smiled when her headlights turned onto Alder Street. It said the district had received small donations after the case was reported honestly in the Lake Benton record. $20 from a retired bus mechanic, $50 from a waitress, $300 from an anonymous parent. Someone sent 2 unopened microscope kits with no note at all. Elena wrote, "I thought you should know people were listening for the right lesson." The photograph showed 12 7th graders in goggles, grinning behind a folding table covered with beakers and potato battery wires. On the whiteboard behind them, in green marker, somebody had written, "Science works when everybody counts." I looked at that picture longer than I meant to. In 28 years on the bench, I have seen verdicts stop harm. I have seen sentences scare people straight. It is rarer and holier to see justice become a seed in a classroom. The city changed a little too. Greenleaf Pharmacy installed brighter lights near the lot entrance and placed concrete bollards along the curb. The council approved new signage at the Mason and Willow turn. Lake Benton Transit used a still frame from the recovered bus video in a defensive driving seminar for all municipal fleet staff, not to shame Elena, but to show how little space there is between arrogance and injury. Jefferson Middle held a winter fundraiser and raised $18,406.13, enough to restore the science budget for the year and create a small emergency fund for student medications and supply fees. If this part of the story stirs something firm in you, the part where decent people quietly close ranks around what was hurt, then mark that feeling and hold on to it. Hit like on that belief in your own heart, if nowhere else, because communities do not survive on outrage alone. They survive on repair. Rowan returned for his first compliance review on Thursday, 22nd January 2026 at 9:05 a.m. He had served 97 days after credit calculations. He came in wearing county-issue release clothes under a plain dark coat, no designer buckle, no watch, no careful stubble. His face looked younger and older at once. There is a certain kind of softness that leaves a person when the world stops moving around his wants. He stood straighter than before, but not with pride, more like someone learning how to stay upright when nobody is admiring him. Probation officer Helen Rourke reported he had made the first restitution payment through funds liquidated from the sale of the Porsche and from a court-approved contribution by his father. She also reported that the social media accounts had been deactivated under supervision, though archived records remained preserved for legal purposes. There had been no violations in custody. There had been, however, one disciplinary write-up his second week for mocking another inmate's prison job assignment. The report said the behavior stopped after he lost phone privileges for 7 days. Consequence was still teaching him by the simple method of repetition. I asked Rowan whether he understood why he was back before me. He said, "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was lower now, not polished, just lower. I asked what he had learned at the school supply warehouse so far. He swallowed before answering. That teachers buy tape and notebooks with their own money, he said, and that nobody there talks about it like they're heroes. I asked about paratransit. He said he had helped fold wheelchair ramps in freezing rain and had learned the schedule of one rider who never missed her kidney treatments. He did not say he suddenly became good. He said only what he had seen. That was the first honest thing I had heard from him. At the end of that review, Rowan asked if he could say something about Elena Marquez. Mr. Hale, still his attorney of record, looked startled. I allowed it with one warning: no self-pity, no excuses, no performance. Rowan kept his eyes on the wood grain of counsel table and said, I thought being embarrassed was the worst thing that could happen to me. I did not understand that I had made her afraid in front of a child. I knew that in words before. I did not know it where it hurts. It was not a perfect apology. Perfect apologies are mostly fiction. But it was the first time he spoke like another human being existed in the same moral weather he did. 3 weeks later, I received a short memo from Greenleaf Community Asthma Outreach. Rowan had stocked vouchers, cleaned shelves, broken down cardboard, and carried supply boxes without incident. At first, he avoided eye contact with patients. By the fourth shift, the clinic coordinator wrote, he had begun checking expiration dates twice because he had overheard a mother crying at the counter over an inhaler she could not afford. The memo did not call him transformed. It called him present. I trusted that word more. On Wednesday, 18th of March, 2026, Elena appeared for a restitution status hearing because some of the insurance paperwork had finally cleared. She wore the same navy coat and brought a new folder, this one less worn. Mateo was not with her, but she told the court he had entered the district science fair with a project about airflow in lungs using balloons and a plastic bottle. Luis had helped paint the display board while sitting at the kitchen table after dialysis. She said this with the matter-of-fact pride of a woman who does not dramatize joy either. If you know a teacher, a nurse, a veteran, a single parent, or any everyday person who keeps this country stitched together without applause, send this story to them in your own way. Not because they need flattery, but because too often the world teaches them they are invisible until something bad happens. They deserve a record that says otherwise. At the next compliance review, on Tuesday, 23rd April 2026, Rowan asked through counsel whether he might address Elena directly if she consented. She did. I watched him stand. No camera, no followers, no audience beyond the few people with business in court that morning. He turned toward her but did not step closer than the rail allowed. Ms. Marquez, he said, I used your life to feel bigger than my own. I am ashamed of that. I mocked your work because I had never done work that mattered to anyone but me. Elena listened without rescuing him from the discomfort. That, too, was a kind of mercy. When he finished, she answered in the same calm voice she had used from the start. I accept that you said it, she told him. I do not know yet what I feel. That part takes longer. Then she added, but if you really understand what teachers buy for children, keep understanding it when nobody is supervising you. I have heard polished lawyers make speeches with less wisdom than that single sentence. Rowan nodded once. There was no dramatic breakdown, no cinematic forgiveness, just a clean piece of truth laid where both could see it. By early summer, the ripple had gone wider than either of them knew. Benton County Schools adopted a staff training module on digital harassment and public dignity, built with help from Dr. Naomi Bell and a local legal aid group. The city prosecutor's office, after reviewing the archived clips, filed no new charge tied to specific prior victims because none could be identified beyond a reasonable doubt, but they did partner with Lake Benton Police on a public campaign about filming while driving, reckless social media stunts, and the false glamour of turning strangers into targets. Officer Daniel Pike appeared in one of the town hall sessions in plain uniform and spoke for 6 minutes about how quickly content becomes evidence. As for Rowan, I heard from probation officer Rourke in September that he had completed 487 of the 600 service hours and had stopped trying to count them out loud. That was how she put it, and I knew exactly what she meant. He had taken part-time work unloading delivery trucks at Benton Supply after his father refused to simply replace the lost income. The Rolex had been sold. The Porsche was gone. The young man who once thought a bus camera and a teacher's pain were minor obstacles now spent most mornings lifting boxes marked dry erase markers, graph paper, tape, and low-cost inhaler spacers. I do not tell you that because I need you to admire him. I tell you because justice is not only about the person who was harmed, it is also about whether the person who caused the harm will ever meet reality on terms that might save someone else later. Some do not, some never bend. But once in a while, consequence reaches a place vanity never could. There is one more thing I want to leave with you. My father taught me law at our kitchen table long before any professor did. He would tap his finger beside a casebook and say, "Remember, rules without heart become weapons, and heart without rules becomes chaos." What happened in my courtroom that day mattered because both had to stand together. Elena Marquez needed the shelter of rules. Rowan Kessler needed the boundary of them. And the rest of us needed proof that equal dignity was not just carved into stone above courthouse doors for decoration. So when people ask me whether I still believe in justice after all these years, I tell them this story. I tell them about a teacher in worn flats, a child waiting for an inhaler, a boy in Balenciaga sneakers who thought ordinary people were background noise, and a room full of witnesses who learned that silence can change shape when truth enters it. Power is loud right up until the record gets accurate. Then it has to sit down and listen like everybody else. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. I do not take your time lightly, and I do not forget people who care enough to listen when dignity is on trial. If you stay near this bench a little longer, I will tell you about another day when the smallest voice in my courtroom carried the greatest weight. Until then, remember this: no one is scenery.